slides, I actually didn't realize just how perfect what I've been working on will fit in to the topics that we've been talking about today. And also just how perfectly it would fit in to my 3 core beliefs. So the most important core belief that I have is that if you want to see the future, then you need to look at the edges of any field that you're in. Look at the edges or extreme examples of any network or environment. In healthcare, that means looking at people living with rare disease. In technology, that means looking at hackers. And just in general, tracking what are artists doing. Follow the artists and you'll start to see the future. The second core belief that I hold very dear is that if you are brave enough to share your problem, help will emerge. I've seen it over and over in the fieldwork that I've done. And the third core belief is that the internet gives us access not only to information and data, but also to each other. And the more that we're able to tap into the wisdom of the crowd, especially a diverse crowd, the better. These core beliefs come from the time that I spent doing fieldwork in communities of people living with rare disease and life-changing diagnoses. I spent about 15 years as a researcher. Like an anthropologist goes into the field, I went into the field of these online communities to observe how they were using technology. And what I realize now is that I think of those communities as my home planet. I think of the people who are stretching the edges of any technology and healthcare innovation that they find to the limit. Those are my people, and they share those core beliefs that I talked about. And I wanted to tell a story to illustrate. This is a picture of a child named Drew. In June, his mom, Erin Moore, she's the mother of 4, Drew has cystic fibrosis. She tweeted her request for help in finding a way that he could do his 3 times daily treatment for cystic fibrosis using a hands-free nebulizer. He wanted to be able to get his screen time while he was doing his treatments. An international community of experts from around the world, people like Jose Gomez-Marquez, a professor at MIT, and Keith Grimes, a clinician in England, started tweeting back their ideas. They would draw sketches and tweet them to her. She would prototype and tell them how it was going. What I really love to observe is how people would ask questions like, so how big is that mouthpiece? And she would tweet back a picture of the mouthpiece next to a quarter. And after 3 weeks, they actually came up with a really great prototype that worked for Drew. And what I'm seeing in this story, and I hope that you see too, is that Erin's work deserves our recognition, as does the work of all the people who pitched in to help her. It's Erin's can-do spirit, matched with the know-how of a far-flung network of experts that made all the difference. And people like Erin are, to me, the latest example of how the internet connects us not only to information, but also to each other. And this is a deceptively simple insight that I believe is at the core of the future of healthcare innovation. You're going to hear me using the word maker throughout this presentation, so I wanted to pause for a minute and explain what I mean. Makers modify and improve the world around them. Makers look at a problem and say, not only, I'm going to fix that, they say, my community is going to fix that. The maker movement is also about a return to craft and knowing how to make things and fix things with your hands, but upgraded thanks to new tools like 3D printers. Imagine what would happen if MacGyver had access to a makerspace, like a tech shop. Imagine what will happen when someone with a health problem is able to gain access to rapid prototyping tools and prototype a solution that then can be shared with the community. In my fieldwork, I was tracking how people were using information and data, and it was called the empowered patient movement, or e-patient movement. And what I started noticing is the parallels between the empowered patient movement and the maker movement. I think what happened to the democratization of information and data that the internet has unlocked for all of us over the last 15 or 20 years is going to happen in the democratization of access to design and manufacturing tools. And here's what's really key about open innovation. Erin shared her problem. She shared her request. And because she was part of a network, Twitter, that she had access to all of these experts who could help her. And that yielded a better prototype and a great final product. Now, I want to say that people have always modified and improved the medical and assistive devices that they use. People have always found ways to make their lives easier, whether it's a new way to take their medications or deal with pain or handle everyday tasks within their limitations. But what we've got now is the opportunity to upgrade everyone's skills and to crowdsource solutions. When I think about how technology is changing the innovation landscape, I think about a course that I took in college that was a history of technology course, and we looked at, for example, the printing press. As you may know, Gutenberg used his famous printing press to recreate the illuminated manuscript. It was an ornate Bible, and it was characterized by being extremely heavy. It was likely to be owned by a member of the elite. It was printed in Latin. It was really something that was not to be shared widely. But within 50 years of Gutenberg's invention, printing presses became more widely available, and the model shifted to pamphlets. And this is actually a stepping stone technology, riffing off of an earlier speaker. Pamphlets could be printed cheaply, quickly, in the languages that people could read. And they were distributed to a widely distributed and literate audience. In a way, pamphlets connected us not only to information, but to each other. My favorite description of pamphlets is that they are documents of controversial times, like Thomas Paine's Common Sense pamphlet, which helped spark the American Revolution. So I invite you to think about, what are the documents of controversial times now? What are the pamphlets of today? Is it Twitter? Is it blogs? How are people using new communications tools to spread new ideas? For generations, we've celebrated our great inventors, the Gutenbergs of healthcare, who produced incredible innovations alone, or certainly in a top-down priestly capacity. But I'm here to say that we were waiting for a new environment for innovation that we're at the beginning of right now. And that is where tools are more evenly distributed, and the need knowers, like Erin, could be connected to the problem solvers, like Jose at MIT. We can still celebrate the lone genius in the lab, but let's also celebrate the mom at the kitchen table, the blogger who uploads their design and shares it with their community, and the people who ask over and over, how might we do this differently? How might we do this better? So here's what I'm seeing in the landscape. Barriers to entry are being lowered in communications, design capabilities, and manufacturing. Collaboration across time and space is now possible. Crowdfunding is now possible. And so my question is, what will happen when everyone has access to the tools and information they need to solve their own problems and to share their ideas with others? Everyone is a change maker. It's in all of us, and it starts with a willingness to be open and to ask, why not? When I arrived at HHS last year, I brought with me the spirit of the empowered patient movement. As a researcher, I tracked this pattern of people being locked out of libraries, locked out of medical journals, locked out of research labs, and locked out of data warehouses. And they used every technology, every wedge that they could to gain access to all of those places, so that we now have open and public access to many of the places that were locked, that didn't allow patients in. The lead users of healthcare and technology were using it to network, to join together and demand access to data and information. They showed all of us the point of technology in healthcare, and what I would say is the point of the internet. In working with these communities of people living with rare and life-changing diagnoses like Mobius syndrome, it's a very rare condition that presents with full facial paralysis, I began to see a new pattern. People, yes, were connecting with information and data, but they were also sharing hardware that they'd created. They were sharing assistive technology, ways to feed a baby born with full facial paralysis, for example, who can't suck on a bottle or a nipple, or modifications of writing implements for people with low dexterity. So as the Chief Technology Officer, I decided to expand the definition of technology to include medical and assistive devices. And I've spent the last year exploring open innovation and the intersection between the maker movement and healthcare. When I started walking this idea around HHS and around the federal government, I made a lot of people uncomfortable. That's okay. I'm actually used to that now after leading innovation teams for the last 20 years. Very few people want to hear that their world is going to change because of new technology. I'm not afraid of being called weird or different. On my home planet, I'm normal. What I look for are people who share my core beliefs, who lean into the curves and say, let's go faster. In the federal government, those people work at NASA. When I started talking with people at NASA, we realized that we at HHS share a common challenge: sustaining human life in extreme environments, such as after a natural disaster, setting up an Ebola clinic, or living on the International Space Station. We realized that the skills that a MacGyver patient or first responder needs are the same skills that NASA is trying to build in their astronauts. Because when you are on a mission to Mars and something breaks, it's like being a caregiver in the middle of the night. No one is coming. It's up to you and the people that you're with. So the question is, how do you build people's improvisation and collaboration skills? NASA and HHS collaborated on a symposium. We held the first day at the Johnson Space Center in Houston and the second day at University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. We invited a wide and diverse crowd. We had NASA flight surgeons and engineers. We had public health experts from the CDC and NIH. We had architects, designers. We invited 2 people who had wintered over in Antarctica and an officer in the US Army. We had experts in disability and in the particular challenge of older adults living alone. We had a woman who helped design the first zero-gravity 3D printer and who was a first responder to disaster zones, teaching locals, for example, how to set up their own fresh water supply. Frankly, we made people a little uncomfortable as we had to translate each other's acronyms. But we gained confidence over the course of the 2 days, and we came away with new connections between fields that nobody could have anticipated. At both JSC and UTMB, there's a couple acronyms, Johnson Space Center and University of Texas Medical Branch, I found the spirit of the maker movement, a return to craft and an emphasis on collaboration. This first picture, these 2 pictures are from the robot and rover workshop at the Johnson Space Center. This is in a huge airplane hangar, and each team has their own space, and it's like a fantasy land for people who like to tinker. The next day at University of Texas Medical Branch, we found something similar on a much smaller scale. That's the place where we found the first makerspace in a hospital. And it's where nurses are given the tools they need to prototype and build solutions to clinical challenges that they face. For example, Jason Schaefer is a burn unit nurse who built a portable shower unit with 3 movable heads in the hospital's makerspace. He was inspired by the challenge of treating a victim of a chemical burn. In that case, nurses worked together for 6 hours, spraying water as best they could, irrigating the skin. It was exhausting and inefficient. And Jason said there has to be a better way. And so we went to the makerspace and worked with the engineer there. And now nurses can direct the nozzle where the water is needed and be free to care for the patient in other ways. My work this year has also led me to some incredible people who co-design assistive technology with the people who actually use it, as I saw happening recently in Pittsburgh at the Human Engineering Research Laboratory. In collaboration with the University of Pittsburgh and the VA, engineers work with returning veterans who use assistive technology, figuring out how that equipment can better serve the men and women who need it. This is a picture of something they call the strong arm that they're developing to give people more independence if they're using a wheelchair. One picture that I can't show you is of a prototype wheelchair that was co-designed with a veteran. They asked him, what would you like to do with your power chair that you can't do now? And his answer was, I'd really like to take my kids to the pool or to a splash park. And right now, if I take my power wheelchair anywhere where it could get wet, it will short out and not work. And so the designers and engineers set to work, and they created a power chair that works completely on compressed air. It's a hydraulic system, and it can get wet, and it's no problem. How many of you saw Ben Matlin's essay in the New York Times last week? It was titled, "A Disabled Life is a Life Worth Living." And he wrote, let's face it, people with disabilities are nothing if not first-class problem solvers. We find all manner of devices to enable us to raise a fork, drive a car or van, go to the beach. I now control my electric wheelchair with my lips because my hands no longer function. These very words are being written with a voice recognition computer. True, it's a hassle to having to devise alternative methods for living a normal life, but when it works, how good it feels, how triumphant and liberating. I'm proud of my persistence and creative coping skills. I love that essay. The Americans with Disabilities Act has shown us the way. All of us benefit from the curb cuts. Anybody with wheels benefits from the curb cuts that we now see. And we're also benefiting from one-handed devices in the kitchen or wherever we are, because a lot of us may only have one hand because, let's say, we're holding a baby in the other. All of the inventors that I've talked about are examples of what Eric von Hippel of MIT calls lead users, people who actually have the problem and are therefore uniquely suited to solve it. Think about how many people modify medical and assistive technology and then don't share that innovation because there's no platform to share their idea, or because they think that it's somehow against government regulation, or that industry wouldn't welcome it. Think about how many people would potentially benefit if we could encourage them to share their ideas. Smart organizations look for lead users, like UTMB creating that makerspace so that Jason could create that device. So I'd love to hear from you, maybe during the Q&A. Where do you see examples of lead users in the hardware sector? One group that I'm watching very closely is the We Are Not Waiting hashtag on Twitter. It's a group of people living with type 1 diabetes who are networking their devices to create essentially a closed loop system for themselves. And what they're really doing is warming up the field for the rest of us. They're demystifying device data so that the rest of us, so that a broader group of people can benefit from their lead. The other group that I'm watching is anything having to do with assistive technology for age-related disability. We all know this is going to be a growth area, and this is something that all designers should be focused on all over the world. But the barriers that I saw in the e-patient and data liberation movement are just as strong or stronger in the medical and assistive technology sphere. The old hierarchical model is one in which people in industry hold everything close. Von Hippel calls this the model of we innovate, you consume. The shift to a user innovation model, an open innovation model, rewards manufacturers who see the potential of listening to users and opening up their doors, opening up their data, sharing the lab, sharing the device technology, maybe even handing people the tools they need to modify their assistive technology. The forces at work against us are strong, but I really believe that we're stronger, and the tide is shifting toward what I'm calling the open innovation movement in hardware, invent health. So the currents running in our favor are that industrial strength manufacturing tools are becoming cheaper, easier to use, and more widely available. Access to new manufacturing capabilities such as rapid prototyping using 3D printers create new opportunities for individuals and small businesses. New funding mechanisms and opportunities such as crowdfunding, incubators, and accelerators enable new entrants to the field. Social media enables inventors to share their ideas with potential users for design feedback, funding, and distribution. And finally, a return to craft and making as a mainstream activity gives people the skills and creative confidence to demystify devices and solve their own problems. So I ask you, what could happen to boost or mute each one of these forces? What might we learn if we push open design principles out to the edges of the network, where humanity lives, where engineers meet artists? We must walk together toward solutions and toward the possibility of sustaining health, even in extreme environments. We must keep trying and talking with each other and making things with our hands, solving problems and sharing ideas. We must give people access to the means of production and a community to support collaborative problem solving as the maker movement is doing. We must look for people who are not scared of the future, who will lean into those curves, who embrace the possibility that everyone has something to learn and everyone has something to teach. We must keep shining a light on the path forward, knowing that everyone will join us eventually. Because what did people think would happen when we connected a worldwide community of patients, clinicians, engineers, artists, architects, designers, astronauts, all of us? I believe in people's innate creativity and can-do spirit, and I believe that if we give people the tools to solve their problems, they will. Thank you.